Okay, we're going to go live here. Chuck Holton here. How's it going, everybody? Had a very frustrating experience trying to do a live on CBN's account yesterday. And I don't know what the problem was, but let's hope that it's not going to be a problem on this live today. Please, God. So I'm going to talk about what's happening in Panama with the immigration crisis, which obviously directly affects the United States, and the new president here. And I just made a fool of myself on national TV because I said his name wrong. His name is Jose Raul Mulino. Mulino, M-U-L-I-N-O, not Molino, which would be like calling him hamburger. So Jose Raul Mulino is like it's kind of a Trump-like figure, actually, for Panama. He's further to the right than most of the candidates were. He's more pro-business. And he came to power by using as the main focus of his campaign, a promise to stop the illegal migration through the Darien Gap. Now, it's interesting because you would kind of think that this wouldn't be such a big deal for Panamanians because it doesn't really affect the Panamanians all that much. Yes, they had 520,000 people come through their country last year on the way to the United States, but they didn't stay. They barely even touched the soil in Panama. When they get out of the Darien Gap, come to the very first road that they find, there's a camp there. They go into that camp until they can raise about $60, which is what it costs for the bus fare, arranged by the Panamanian government. And when they get that $60, they get on the bus and they head directly to Costa Rica. So they don't take jobs away from Panamanians. They don't increase the crime rate a whole lot here in Panama because they pretty much stay in camps on either end of the country and get bussed right through the middle. So why is it that Jose Raul Mulino was able to sweep to the presidency, in which a somewhat unexpected candidate, when he used that as his main campaign point? Well, there are several reasons. First of all, they understand that these people are going to the United States, and the United States has actually had quite a hand, everybody here can see it, in increasing the flow through Panama, which leads to my second point. So the flows have gone from something like 100,000 a year in the first year of Joe Biden's presidency to 520,000 a year last year. And the reason for that has a lot to do with Alejandro Mayorkas. Mayorkas has been to Panama, I think, 3 times since, not including this last trip. And he has each time made it easier, faster, safer, and cheaper, and therefore more likely for more people to come through the Darien Gap into Panama. And although it doesn't cost the Panamanians a whole lot directly that they can see, Molina was able to point out the scale of human suffering going on down there and say, this should not be happening in our country. And the reason it's happening is because of the United States. So he pulled a Trump and he said, I'm going to fix this and the U.S. is going to pay for it. Unlike Donald Trump, he is actually making that happen, or at least making a play to make that happen. What I mean is, yesterday, Alejandro Mayorkas came down to Panama, attended the inauguration ceremony of the new president, and then signed, or actually right before the inauguration ceremony, signed a deal with Panama for the United States to pay for the plane flights for all of the people who come through the Darien Gap, 500,000 people, to send them all right back home where they started, to their origin country. Okay, so when we're talking about the flows of migration, there are three different kinds of countries that we got to talk about. We got to talk about origin countries, transit countries, and destination countries. Origin countries are the countries people are leaving because of war, disaster, poverty, famine, persecution, whatever. Transit countries, they go through to get to on their way to destination countries. And the U.S. is the biggest one of those. The Panamanians cannot legally just send these people right back to Colombia, because unless they are Colombian, that would be against international law. There's an agreement made for global migration. It's a global migration compact. It was made several years ago that if you're going to send somebody back out of your country, you have to send them back to their own country, not to a transitory country, unless you have an agreement with that transit country ahead of time. And they've agreed to accept these people. Very few of those would. So they signed a deal for the United States to pay for the plane tickets, both commercial and or chartered jets, to take them from Panama and take them back to their home countries. They're talking about a lot of plane tickets and to a lot of different places, because people come through the Darien Gap from 150 different countries around the globe. And so from 150 different countries, the problem that you run into, and that undoubtedly they will run into here, is that not all of those countries want their people back. Many of those countries are encouraging their people to leave and go to the United States. So there are now a couple of, again, we have to define our terms here. When you talk about countries that do not want their people back at all, that will not accept them back, those are, there's a term for those kinds of countries, but let's just call them, I'm trying to think of something simple. We'll just call them non-conforming countries. Countries that don't conform to international law, which says that you have to allow your citizens to return to their own country. Whether or not they have paperwork, whether or not they have a passport, if they are from your country, you've got to let them back in. And some countries just don't. Again, because they want them to leave. They want them to go specifically to the United States for various reasons, which we'll talk about later. Those non-conforming countries are, there's about 15 at last count, are countries like Cuba, China, Ghana. Many countries in Central Africa won't take their people back. And many of those countries which won't take their people, Haiti, because they want the remittances that will come to their country. You understand that people emigrating out of Venezuela, for example, 6 million people leaving Venezuela to go live somewhere else, is not a bad thing for Venezuela, because those people will go make a lot more money than they can make in Venezuela. They won't consume any public services while they're gone in the country of Venezuela. And they will send back money, most likely, to their family members who are still in Venezuela and increase the Venezuelan GDP thereby. So there are countries like Guatemala, for example, which get up to 40% of their total GDP comes from remittances. About 70% of the entire working age population of Mexico, I read at one point, works in the United States at least part-time, at least seasonally. That's massive. And so these countries really want the remittances that come from the United States. Venezuela has another reason that they don't want people to come back, and that's because a lot of the people that they're sending to the U.S. are their prisoners. They're the people that they let out of prison and said, we'll let you free right now as long as you immediately leave and go to the United States. Because then it saves the state money. They don't have to feed them and house them in the prisons anymore. And they don't have to deal with these criminals. Send those criminals to the U.S. They get a double benefit. It helps their country and it hurts America. Win-win for Venezuela. That is happening far more than people realize. So there are about 15 countries that are non-conforming that will not take their people back, refuse to. Then there are a whole bunch of other countries who are just uncooperative because they don't want their people back, but they don't want to go so far as to not sign on to the international treaties for the Compact for Migration, which gives them some other benefits. So countries like Venezuela fall into that camp. Venezuela theoretically will accept their people back, but makes it very, very hard to do so by just slow rolling the process to the point where it's almost impossible. We knew a guy here in Panama one time who was arrested at a checkpoint because he had the same name as somebody that Panamanians were looking for. And he needed the government, he was put in prison in Panama. Panama does not have the system whereby you are innocent until proven guilty. It's kind of the other way around. You're put in prison and then you have to prove that you're innocent in order to get out. So from prison, this guy had to somehow get the government of Venezuela to sign an affidavit or to certify that he was not the, guy that they were looking for. He just had the same name. And the government of Venezuela was like, yeah, whatever. They don't care. Eventually he got it done, but he was in prison for months. And what a pain that is, right? So I got to keep an eye on the time here because I'm doing live hits for Newsmax today. And I've got one in approximately an hour, I think. So I got to pay attention here and make sure they're not trying to get in touch with me. Okay. Yeah, 1:45. Yeah, okay, we're good. So, one tired mama says, I'd change my name. Yeah, good luck with that in Panama. That's pretty hard. So, let's see here. The Darien is not a route. Yes, that's what they've been saying. They started a whole big thing here in Panama, big ad campaign saying, El Darien no es una ruta. The Darien is not a route. And the migrants were like, yeah, whatever, here we come. That one didn't quite work because it is actually a route. So just saying that it's not doesn't actually help much. It's not going to dissuade many people. The same thing like what Mayorkas did last year. I think it was March or April last year. Alejandro Mayorkas came to Panama and gave a speech and said, we are closing the Darien Gap completely for the next 60 days while we try to figure out how to more efficiently allow people to more safely come through into Panama on their way to the United States. So the Darien Gap will officially be closed for the next 60 days. And then he got on a plane and left, and nobody ever did anything, and the Darien was not closed, and people kept coming. And I was in Necoclí with Greta Van Susteren when all this was going on, and we were interviewing people, and we were going, they just said that the Darien is closed. So what are you going to do? And they're like, I'm going to walk through the Darien. I don't know what they're talking about. Like, they didn't pay any attention to that at all. So you have to back it up. If you're going to say something like that, you have to back it up. And that's been the big problem, is that so far, every time Alejandro Mayorkas has showed up in Panama, when he leaves, the flow of migrants gets worse. We get more migrants coming in, not less, or not fewer. So I'm not super positive that this time is going to be any different. I hope and pray that Jose Raul Mulino, will, the new presidente here in Panama, will certainly succeed in his campaign promise to close the Darien Gap. And I hope so, not just for America, but I hope so for the migrants themselves. Because the real cost, I mean, these migrants have to pay a smuggler to get through the Darien Gap, no question. It can range from $300 to $30,000, depending on what route you take and how much help you get and things like that. But the real cost is paid in human misery. The real cost to these migrants is in the numbers of dead and injured who come out of the Darien Gap or don't come out. The children who are orphaned by the trek because their parents die on the way. And there are a couple of dozen, maybe 3 dozen or so every year, children who come stumbling out of the Darien Gap half dead without any parents. And Panama has no idea what to do with them. They don't have a system here to handle that. They're trying to put a system in place, but I mean, there's no like adoption system in place. Panama can't even figure out in many cases what country these kids came from. They don't know what their name is because it's a toddler or even an infant. And so they do everything they can to try to ascertain if they have any family or anybody that will take them. And if they can't find anyone, then they just name them Juan and put them in school. And they live in they don't have orphanages here like you would in a lot of other places. There are 2 orphanages in this country, the entire country, that I know about. Because what Panama's strategy has been with orphans, like if my neighbor, has a kid and he dies and there's nobody, he doesn't have a wife to care for the kid or whatever, they go to the next closest family member and say, congratulations, here's your kid. This kid's all yours. And it's not like would you mind taking this kid? No, it's your responsibility by law. That's my understanding of how it works anyway. They just pass it on to the family. If there is no family, that represents an exceedingly small number of people. And those people, they don't really have an adoption system here. So some friends of ours started a house of hope where they take these kids in and raise them like their own. But we're only talking about maybe a max of 20 or 30 kids at any given time. It's just not very many because they will usually always find some family member to give the kids to. But in the case of these migrant kids, they're foreigners, so they have no right to be here. They don't have any documents. We don't know what country they're from. We don't know what their name is. And so they don't know what to do with them. So there's a new organization which just reached out to me the other day that is putting together or has put together a orphanage for kids like that, these foreign kids who don't have homes or parents or anything like that. I'm going to go down and see if I can remember what the name of that organization is in case you want to look them up. Let's just take a look here real quick. It's called Hands of Faith, Manos de Fe, Panama. And I'm looking to see if they sent me their website, and I don't see one. It's a lady named Julie Proctor, and maybe Julie, if you happen to see this live or see it later, send me an email. You've got my email. Send me an email with your website, and I will mention it. Oh, wait, maybe she did. Send the website. Oh yeah, there it is. She did send it. It's called manosdefe.org. So I'll post that in the chat right now. And if you'd like to support these fine Christian people who are taking care of these children that nobody knows who they are, you can go to manosdefe.org and support them there. I would highly recommend that you do that. They obviously are going to need a lot of help. Now, let's go back to my first question. Why would the candidate for president here in Panama make this the central theme of his candidacy? We got to put a stop to this because, again, it's costing Panama some money, but not like it is in the United States because they're not staying very long. But in the time that they do stay, Panama has had to pay upwards of, I think, $10 million a month to feed and clothe and house these people. And Panama is a very small country. So not only are Panamanians, is he playing on Panamanians' compassion, which he is, and he should. I mean, we should be compassionate about this. These people are suffering, and the suffering is because they're being encouraged by the United States to come through here. And so we need to do something about that. That's the compassion argument, but there's also the financial argument. We could save ourselves $10 million a month if we get these people out of here and put a stop to this. So those are the two main reasons. Now, in his speech yesterday, the speech that Mulino gave after he was inaugurated, I was surprised to hear him make mention of something that makes me wonder if there's not a third reason why he made this a, kind of a main focus of his candidacy. And that third reason is because they're kind of upset with the United States for putting, as he put it, disrespecting Panama by putting them on gray lists for money laundering. The United States, there's an international organization, I think it's called the FATF, Financial Something Task Force, that a few years ago put Panama on a gray list saying that there's a lot of money laundering that happens here because Panama doesn't go far enough to crack down on it in their country. Well, there's a reason why Panama did not go as far as the United States would like them to go to crack down on money laundering, and that's because Panama had refused for many years to share information about their bank's customers with the United States. Of course, the United States doesn't like that because the United States, if I'm an American citizen, I come down here and open a bank account, which used to be very easy to do. That bank account, it's an honor system thing for me now to divulge that bank account and that money to the U.S. federal government. There's no way for them to find out if I'm hiding money down here in Panama. But that's not a ding on Panama. Panama doesn't have an obligation to share its customers' private personal information, especially financial information, with any government in the world that wants it. They don't have to do that. But the United States wants them to do that. And so the United States put them on this gray list, basically telling businessmen, hey, don't do business in Panama. They're on a gray list. And this is the first time that the former president of Panama, they called him the turtle, because he just stuck his head up once in a while and looked around and then went back in his hole. He was very sick with cancer, and he's a complete shill for the World Economic Forum and that sort of thing, and really wanted to run with the cool kids in the WEF. And so he made his decisions not based on what was best for Panama, but on what would make Panama look best to the radical leftists of the World Economic Forum. And So I never heard him say a word about the fact that the U.S. exerting its influence to get Panama gray listed on this for financial reasons was an act of dishonor to Panama. But this president said so in his inaugural address yesterday. And he went so far as to say, without naming countries specifically, look, we will not accept being put on these different colored lists, blacklist, gray list, whatever you want to call it. We're not going to accept that anymore. And if you, whatever country, if the shoe fits, the United States, if you think you're going to continue to disrespect us like this and then just get free, unfettered access to our canal, you got another thing coming. So that's the first time I've ever heard a Panamanian president bring that up. The Panamanians have a tremendous bargaining chip that they can use to leverage their wishes or to at least get favorable treatment by countries around the globe, and that is this canal. And so this is the first time I've heard that said, and boy, that really pricked my ears up. It was very interesting to me that Alejandro Mayorkas hopped right on a plane as soon as Mulino got elected and hurried down here to sign this agreement obligating the United States to pay for all these repatriations or removals, as the case may be. And it's obvious to me that the Biden administration was not really happy about having to do that. Why? Because as far as I've seen, there's no video out there of it happening. There was no mention in the U.S. press until yesterday about this happening. And Mayorkas didn't stick around. He didn't give speeches, as far as I know. I mean, I've looked at the available footage today, and I haven't seen any. Maybe there's some out there. But the previous times he's come, it's been a lot bigger deal. There's been a lot more publicity about his visits. This visit was almost like under the table, slide in there, sign this thing, okay, yes, fine, and get out. Now, if you watched my live yesterday, you heard me talk about some of the reasons why this agreement may just be security theater. Because, number one, Mayorkas and the Biden administration are still engaging in massive amounts of importing illegal immigrants intentionally, not across the U.S. southern border, but from their home countries, even from countries that won't accept them back, like Cuba. Cubans can get on their phone, open up the CBP One app, put in their information, find a sponsor in the United States who says, I'll vouch for this guy and I'll make sure that he has a place to live when he gets here. That which isn't going to be hard anymore because there are friends and neighbors and relatives of people from all over the country that are now in the U.S. who can act as sponsors. It's this massive chain migration, just pulling one wave after another into the United States. And then through this CBP One app, they can get pre-cleared for asylum without ever setting foot through the Darien Gap or across the U.S. southern border. They can then once they get pre-clearance, they can get on an airplane in Cuba and fly directly into Cleveland, and they don't have to go through the Darien Gap. They don't have to go across the U.S. southern border. And the United States has set up clearing centers in Colombia, in Guatemala, in Nicaragua, and other places to assist people in doing this. But you don't have to go to those centers to do it. People are doing it from all over the globe. But if they've set up places where the U.S. will help you fill out the forms. If you have a hard time, you just go to one of these centers and then fly directly to the United States. So Mayorkas has not stopped that program. That's still going. There are still a lot of people coming across the U.S. southern border although fewer of them are turning themselves into Border Patrol because they, the recent executive orders by Biden to slow it down, at least for the time being, and the agreement that Biden made with Manuel Lopez Obrador, the former president of Mexico, whereby he pledged, I think, 800,000 green cards for Mexicans or visas for Mexicans to enter legally into the United States in return for AMLO stopping the migration, or at least slowing the migration through Mexico into the United States up until the election. After the election, then all bets are off if Biden wins again. So this is what Panama is now facing. So let's assume that Jose Raul Mulino, Presidente here in Panama, is very serious about closing the Darien Gap, and I believe he is. You still run into this issue of all these migrants that are coming in without passports. They have no paperwork. They're not in any database. And so there's no way for us to know where they come in from. And that being the case, all they have to do when they are asked, what country are you from, is they have to choose one of the 15 countries that refuses to take returns, that won't accept these return flights. And then presumably, Panama will have to just let them go and let them continue on to the United States. Now, I haven't seen any granular details about this agreement that was made between the U.S. and Panama yesterday. Haven't seen the text of it. And I haven't seen the president talking about what will happen if these people come in and they're not able to identify what country they're from, or they come from one of the countries that is not cooperative in taking them back. But I'm making the assumption that the president, that the country here in Panama will just have to let those people go and hope that people are going to be deterred by some people being sent back. But I think that this is a big cat and mouse game. People are just going to game the system however they can. And we're going to start seeing a huge influx of people from Cuba again, even if they're actually speaking with a Venezuelan accent. We're going to see a lot of people who are black people who say they're coming from Ghana or something like that. Of course, the Chinese who are coming through the Darien Gap won't probably diminish at all because China won't take their people back. And so we had 40,000 Chinese last year go illegally through the Darien Gap. We most likely will see more than that this year. I don't know that this seems to me to be a half measure. And if I have a chance to sit down with President Mulino, and I'm going to put in a request to do an interview with him, I'm going to ask him, would you consider making a decree that anyone who comes into Panama illegally must stay in a camp in the Darien Gap for 1 year of confinement, not allowed to leave, and then they will be allowed to continue 1 year in Panama. Get the United States to help pay for that. And if you escape from the camp and we capture you at trying to make your way north anyway, 5 years in prison. So continue to deport everybody you can. That's fine. Go ahead and deport them. Hey, thank you very much. I can't read that. MM, I appreciate you. Continue to deport people as much as you want, but if you can't deport them, I would say that the follow-up plan would be to say, anybody we can't deport, we're going to keep for 1 year. And then we'll let you go. We'll move you on. But I would say that would immediately stop the rest of the people coming through, because that's hard to game. It's hard to game that system. Now, maybe what happens then is the cartels start a new service whereby they put you on a boat and they completely bypass Panama and take you right straight to Costa Rica and drop you off. And then maybe Costa Rica will have to deal with that. But without a doubt, this new president is going to make a dent in the migration flows. That's good. The United States is actually sending people from, I think, the Department of Homeland Security and the Border Patrol to help train Panamanians on how to interview people and ascertain what country they come from. That they're probably better at that because they have more experience than the Panamanians. We get, 500,000 people a month or more coming into the United States. So not 500,000 a year, but so they're probably better at that. But even the United States is not that good at that, because I've talked to a lot of migrants who say, oh, well, I speak a Quechua language, or I speak an indigenous language from my country, as well as Spanish. But what they told us is, when you get to the United States, just forget your Spanish. Just don't speak any Spanish. And when you do your interview for asylum, if you don't speak a language that they have a translator for, so if you speak Quechua, if you speak Embera or something like that, they just have to let you go. They just let you go. So there's this huge spike in number of people who speak these gobbledygook, they're legit languages and sometimes maybe not legit. But whatever the language is, it's a language that the US doesn't have a translator for. And so those people just get to waltz right into the United States. Thank you very much. The US, by the way, people are asking, how can the US stop this illegal migration? We could do the same thing. We could start putting deterrence in place. Finishing the wall is one way. That's going to slow it. Making people wait in Mexico, that did the job under the Trump administration. Nobody wanted to stay in Mexico for 2 or 3 years until they got an asylum hearing. And so you just announce they have to stay in Mexico, and boom, that's it. Failing that, maybe the new communist president of Mexico doesn't agree to that. You can bet that if Donald Trump gets reelected, that there's going to be a lot of conflict, a lot of friction between the U.S. and Mexico, because Mexico's new president is super far to the left. I would say perhaps even more so than AMLO was. And so let's say that Mexico just flat out refuses to let these people stay. We have lots of sanctions and trade restrictions we could put on Mexico to hurt them very badly financially. And that's a very good incentive for Mexico to play ball. But I would argue that it would even make sense for the United States to just literally put these people in camps in the United States and say, you have to stay in this camp for the next 3 years until you have an asylum hearing. We would have to keep some people, for sure. But the number of people who would make that calculus and say, that's worth it, is pretty low. In some cases, maybe not. Because I went and visited a place where they were keeping unaccompanied minors one time in the United States. It was Fort Leonard Wood, I think. It was at a military base in the central part of America. And they had taken over a basic training barracks building and turned it into a holding center for unaccompanied minors. These are people up to age 18. It was really, really, really hard to get in, and it was a real rigmarole. I may have told that story before. It was terrible trying to get in there. But one of the things I learned in there is these kids are getting schooling, 3 meals a day, hot meals, a safe place to sleep, free medical care, free education, and calls home to their families for free on a weekly basis. What do you think those conversations sound like when they call their parents? Oh my gosh, it's so terrible here. Oh, we hate it. No, these are people that have never had a hot shower before. These are people for whom 3 hot meals a day, 3 healthy hot meals a day is something of their dreams. Free medical care, free education, that doesn't exist where they live. And so even though they're not allowed to leave, there's a soccer field, they can play soccer, they can, play basketball, they can have their friends. To them, it's more like a boarding school. And that was one of the things that we found out when the U.S. started, they were trying to end the pirate problem in the Gulf of Aden and off the coast of Somalia, is that most of these Somali pirates, if you arrest them and put them in jail, you're giving them 3 meals a day, showers, medical care, food, that's not a punishment for them. These people come from a place where those things are not normal. You take them and put some of these terrorists, you take them and put them in Gitmo, yeah, they're going to whine and complain in front of the TV cameras and try to make a big deal. Oh, we're being tortured here because whatever. But without a doubt, having spent a lot of time in Afghanistan, I can promise you, these people are living better in Gitmo than they ever lived in their entire life. And so it's maybe not such a great thing to do. But anyway, where is he going to put the people they can't send back? One tired mama asks. Well, that was the thing I was saying, that they haven't said yet what's going to happen to the people they can't send back. I'm assuming they're not going to keep them, which means they'll probably just let those people go on like they have been. And that's why there is your giant opening for them to game the system. All you have to do is throw away your passport and claim to be from Cuba, and you're in, because Cuba won't take them back. So let's see here. United States taxpayers paying for all of it. Let's see. Did not the USA give the canal to Panama, which the USA made? Yes, Speak Life, that's correct. The United States built the Panama Canal back in the early part of the 20th century. And we ran it until midnight on December 31st, 1999. And then it transferred over to the Panamanians. And now it belongs to the Panamanians. The Panamanians run it. And so that's a whole different podcast. But, we could talk a lot about whether or not that was a good idea. There are arguments on both sides of that issue that I can see. But suffice it to say, the Panamanians run the canal now, control who goes through it, and that gives them a lot of leverage over the countries that use the canal, the United States being one. Heartbeat says it's all politics. Joe's trying to save votes over the border. Yes, that's true. Okay. Anybody else have a question? Post it now. Otherwise, I'm going to have to let you go and go prepare for my live hit on Newsmax. Now, Steve Lewis says, I saw yesterday that the U.S. government is taking bids to build detention centers in all 50 states. I've heard that rumor since the beginning of the Obama administration. I've even gone and visited some of the places where they say they're building, camps. Steve, I don't think that means what you think it means necessarily. Building detention centers, a lot of people say, the UN is sending troops to the United States and they're going to build detention centers and concentration camps and put American conservatives and Christians in there. Well, maybe, but not anytime soon. I went and visited one of these sites in the Midwest somewhere, and it's a state park that they set up in a way that if there was a massive natural disaster someplace, they would have on-site resources to bring people there and keep them there for a limited amount of time until they could rebuild wherever that goes. So they have some, sites set out for tents, and they have some buildings that they've built and some storage and things like that. But I don't believe that they're building detention centers in all 50 states for Americans. Maybe they're building more prisons. They probably need them. How was my daughter's wedding? We haven't had the wedding yet. The wedding's in the end of July. Please, how long will you be in Panama? What are your future travel plans? Kelly, I'm leaving tomorrow and heading to, actually going back to the city tonight, leaving tomorrow and heading to George, the city of George in the state of Washington, George, Washington, for the 4th of July, because how much more America can you get? And they have the world's largest cherry pie, and I love cherry pie. So I'm going to go speak at their citywide 4th of July celebration in George, Washington. And after that, we're going to be flying back. There's a lot of travel coming up, for sure. Israel question, how are things in Judea and Samaria? Still tense, still difficult, and it's, wait a minute. Diane B. are speechless. I must have missed something. It's weird how these comments work, because people can be watching like way back at the beginning and making comments, and it pops up here, and I think they're commenting on something I just said, and that's weird. So some people have been asking about the interview that I did with this guy, Destiny. His name is Stephen Bonnell. He made his money as a streamer on Twitch, streaming video games, and made a lot of money at that. And then is trying to, well, not trying to, he is transitioning himself into becoming a political commentator, likes politics. And so he's started this podcast called the Bridges Podcast. I've had people, look, Stephen Bonnell is kind of like a liberal Ben Shapiro. He's a smart guy, talks really fast, and has a podcast. But he is trying to get people on there from all walks of life to discuss things like adults. And there were some people that I've seen comment like, oh, you're going on Destiny's podcast? Well, bye, I'm never watching you again. I'm like, well, okay, that's fine. But I have to say, he's got a big following, number one. 1 million plus followers, and those people need to hear about Jesus. And if you invite me on your podcast, don't be surprised if I talk about Jesus. And I, in fact, did on his podcast, and he was kind enough to let me speak. So I'm not going to turn down an opportunity like that. Secondly, people were saying, he's going to sandbag you, he's just bringing you on there to try to humiliate you. Well, I believe I can defend my opinions and my positions well enough to defend them against all comers. And so I'm not the least bit, worried that I'm going to get sandbagged, because if he wants to try to sandbag me, I will defend my positions. And in fact, we spent 5 hours making 2 episodes of his podcast together, and it was a very enjoyable conversation. It was a very reasonable conversation. He didn't attack me. He didn't agree with everything I said, but he didn't attack me at all. He was very reasonable. He listened. He let me speak. He never once interrupted me. He asked very probing questions, very, very intelligent questions about things that didn't have anything to do with politics, just interested in me, interested in my career as a stockbroker, interested in my career as a ranger in the military. What's the military like this way? How does that work as a broker? What kind of options did you trade? That kind of stuff. So it was an enjoyable conversation. We really had a great time. And he's kind enough to, give me that platform to speak, and I took it. And I learned some things from him too. And I think we found some very interesting common ground throughout that time. So people are not, I think the takeaway from this is that people are not the caricatures that are presented to you online, on social media. People are people, and they're three-dimensional, not one-dimensional. And so keep that in mind. And, you know, everything you know about me, if you haven't met me in person, you know, you might learn something more about me if you did. And so I enjoyed it. We had a good time. And that episode, the first episode that we did together, will air on his podcast, Destiny's podcast, July 25th. Okay? July 25th. So, all right. If you are asking to go on the 2025 trip we have planned to Armenia, and I have not sent you a link yet, that's because our payment processor dropped us. We've been doing business through Shopify for a long time, and now all of a sudden I get an email from Shopify saying we're going to cancel your merchant account because we don't allow travel-related services on our site. And I'm like, but what? I had no idea that was a problem. But so we're looking for another payment processor now. Same thing if you're trying to pay the second half of your payment for Israel, for the trip to Israel in October. You may not, unless you use PayPal or Venmo or one of the things on my LinkedIn. Maybe Connie can post my LinkedIn. My link tree, not LinkedIn, link tree. There are some payment options there: PayPal, Venmo, whatever. Venmo's preferable. If you want to pay that way, you can. If you are planning to join us on our trip to Israel in October and Jordan, today is your last day to cancel and get a refund, because we have already started making reservations and paying deposits for hotel rooms and things like that. So after today, or maybe tomorrow, you're not going to be able to get a refund for your deposit. So if you think you might have to cancel now. And we've got a big waiting list of people who want to go, and so we'll replace you with somebody who would like to go. But after, I think tomorrow, you can't get your deposit back. You're gonna lose that if you don't. Okay. Have you heard of Steve Gardner? You're the second person to ask me that, Steve, and no, I have not. I might know him if I saw him. My opinion, you're a very experienced Christian, hardworking man. Thank you very much. It's very kind of you. Okay. So, One Tired Mama, it sounds like maybe you can't come to the George Washington Jamboree because it's 5 hours away. I'm sorry to hear that. Was looking forward to getting to meet you and your husband. Yes, Destiny said that he would vote for Joe Biden if Jill brought him in an urn, which is essentially what she did in the debate the other night. And that's because we talked about that. That's because Stephen believes, he said, I would rather vote for a man who was mentally deficient than vote for a man who is morally deficient. And I said, I certainly cannot disagree with that sentiment. The disagreement might come in which of those two candidates is less moral. But that's the way it goes. So look, if we've got more people that want to replace people who want to cancel on the trip to Israel, we have a boatload of people who want to. But if you would be willing to pay immediately the entire amount of $3,099 double occupancy for our 10-day trip to Jordan and Israel, and you want to replace somebody who's looking to cancel, send me an email at hotzoneholton@gmail.com, and we'll see what we can do. No promises, okay? Will the people in George Washington provide you with a vegan burger? Probably not, but my policy is, if you've invited me to eat with you, I'm not, and you know, you're making something to eat, then I'm going to eat what you serve me, whether or not it's vegan. I'm not a rabid, you know, political or religious vegan. I'm just trying to do my best to outlive my lovely wife by at least one day. Okay? So, are Hamas tunnels all over Gaza Strip, also in Gaza City, etc., or are they only in poorer parts? No, they're everywhere. Those tunnels were everywhere in Gaza. And so that's an easy one to answer. Okay, so that is all I've got. I've got to get ready. I got to hurry up because they're going to be calling me here pretty quick for my Newsmax hit. So thank you very much for joining me on this, and please like and share it. Go to chuckholton.com. I'd really like to beef up the number of people who are supporters on chuckholton.com so that when YouTube demonetizes these videos, we won't be so, you know, dependent on the YouTube dollars. Instead, we can be dependent on, you know, we can be more independent of them. YouTube, for some reason, just automatically demonetizes every video we upload, not including the lives. Some of the lives they do too, but like I uploaded one the other day that was just about where was God on October 7th. It's a 4-minute video. You could go watch it. My answer to somebody's question about where was God on October 7th certainly didn't have anything that went against YouTube's community standards, although I talked about God on it, and they demonetized it immediately. We went back to them, and we always dispute it when they demonetize a video. Most of the time, they come back and agree, oh yeah, there really isn't anything wrong with this, and then they remonetize it. But that's after most of the people have already watched the video, because it takes several days. So it doesn't really help us a whole lot. But just out of principle, we always go and, you know, hit the button to dispute the demonetization. In that 4-minute video where I answered the question, where was God on October 7th? YouTube demonetized the video and upheld that demonetization after reviewing it. So an actual human being who works for YouTube got on there and watched that video and said, nope, this does not conform to our community standards because it talks about God. Put that in your pipe and smoke it. Gotta like that, huh? Am I close to the Darien Gap? I'm about 3 hours from the Darien Gap driving right now. Tonight, when I get to Panama City, I'll be a little closer, not much. Enable the ability to gift channel memberships. Okay. I will, I'll see if I can figure out how to do that. Thanks for asking. Okay. All right, guys. Yeah. Have you considered Rumble? Well, I could go over to Rumble and then I would make zero. Believe it or not, that you're just not gonna, I mean, nobody's gonna watch on Rumble. There's nobody over there. In the greater scheme of things, people do not go to Rumble. Actually, I think every one of the videos that we upload to YouTube automatically gets uploaded to Rumble, to my account on Rumble. And so if you wanted to, you could go watch it there. But I have never once received a paycheck from Rumble. Not once. Nothing. So there's just not enough people over there. So that's the way it goes. All right. God bless you. Yeah, they dropped the don't in Don't Be Evil. That's right. Okay. See you again next time.